Let's just have a word of prayer before we start. Father, we just thank you today as we start to open your word, that your word was made flesh and manifest among us, and we just thank you that word is alive and sharp and living today. And so we just ask that you guide us in the word and open it to our eyes and our hearts. In Yeshua's name we pray. Amen. Amen.
I appreciate the honor to be able to read. Okay. 31. Is that glare too bad when I took my hat off?
I have soft lighting up here, so
Okay.
I already took care of that. Let's see. Yeah. You know what? Let me just talk about this first.
Sure.
So this is a very long Torah portion today. It's a double portion. Obviously, we can't do the entire thing. So we're in Numbers chapter 30. And basically Numbers chapter 30 talks about the vows, the covering, the idea of making vows, and how a woman in particular who's under a husband or a father's covering, that those vows can be broken. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because I spent a lot of time on it last year, and there's a really good, and basically the question that comes out of this today a lot is, I'm getting some feedback up here, it might be too loud, is the question that comes out of this is, if a woman today, a single woman or whatever, is there any way to break their vows? And there's a really good teaching on our YouTube channel called Making and Breaking Vows, and it's about this chapter. The only thing I think I would add to it is that the understanding that's on the teaching is correct. I would say that there's a slightly, in the Hebraic thought, there's a slightly different meaning on sometimes when it uses the word vow. We don't really talk about making an oath and distinguish too much between oaths and vows, but there are some vows that one thing I don't think I addressed in that teaching, and I'll just address it now, is that there's a type of vow where, and you see it multiple times in Scripture, where people will say, well, God, if you will do this, then I'll do this. It's like, if you show me this place and you take me here and I'm victorious, when I come back here, I'm going to build an altar and I'm going to come back and worship you. I mean, there's like 5 of them coming to me at once and I can't even sort out where they are. But it's a very common theme where it's a conditional vow. Basically, you say, if you do this, if I'm victorious, or if you take me through this situation, then I will do this. And so that type of vow. Obviously, if God does His part, you've got to do your part. Obviously, you wouldn't dare break that type of vow. And so it's really not addressing that one so much as that one, but that is conditional not on us, but on God. And I don't think I'd address that. So if there was a situation where we thought God wanted us to do something and it turns out that He didn't do it, it was probably because we misunderstood it or something, then obviously we wouldn't perform our part of it because we probably misunderstood the first part of it. So I didn't address that in the other teaching. So I'm not going to do this entire chapter because we'll get bogged in it. And like I say, there's a really good teaching, probably better than I would do today, already out there. And so with that, let's go to chapter 31. Because that's all, chapter 30 just deals with those vows. And if there's any specific questions, is there any specific questions on that subject? I mean, I just said go watch the video, but then I asked if there are any questions. Watch the video. If you have any questions, let me know. And maybe there is something I left out and didn't realize. This one is, think about where they are. They have. Remember, they dealt with Balaam trying to curse them cuss them and curse them probably. And ultimately what happened was they got involved with the Midianite worship system, the pagan worship system there, and cursed themselves. And that's what Balaam ultimately, we find out Balaam was the one who was behind it, who told Balak that the only way he's going to curse Israel is to get Israel to curse itself. I mean, that's Deuteronomy 28, 29, and 30. It just is, God says, you can't curse them, but they can curse themselves. And so they basically got involved in this pagan worship system. Obviously, it's most of those systems, including this one, is centered around a pagan temple and idolatry and sexual immorality, and all that was part of it. And so obviously a lot of the women are involved in it. And here, notice in 31, they're fixing to take vengeance on the Midianites. And it's actually, the first verse, it says, Yahweh spoke to Moses saying, take vengeance on the Midianites. Okay? So this isn't a group of guys who just like, hey, those people are really bad, let's go kill them. Okay? This is instruction from God. And we can talk about why and stuff in the midrash portion. So that's where we are, just to get us moving forward there. So go ahead and start reading there.
31:2.
Yeah.
Take full vengeance for the sons of Israel on the Midianites. Afterward, you will be gathered to your people. And Moshe spoke to the people, saying, arm men from among you for the war, that they may go against Midian, to execute the Lord's vengeance on Midian. 1,000 from each tribe of all the tribes of Israel you shall send to the war. So there were furnished from the thousands of Israel 1,000 from each tribe, 12,000 armed for war. Pardon me. And Moshe sent them 1,000 from each tribe to the war. And Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the priest, to the war with them, and the holy vessels and the trumpets for the alarm in his hand. So they made war against Midian, just as Jehovah had commanded Moshe, and they killed every male. And they killed the kings of Midian, along with the rest of their slain, Elevi, and Rekem, and Zur, and Hur, and Reba, the 5 kings of Midian. They also killed Balaam, the son of Beor, with the sword. And the sons of Israel captured the women of Midian, and their little ones, and all their cattle, and all their flocks, and all their goods they plundered. Then they burned all the cities where they lived, and all the camps with fire. And they took all the spoil, and all the prey, both of men and of beasts. And they brought the captives, and from the prey, and the spoil to Moses and to Eleazar the priest, and to the congregation of the sons of Israel, to the camp at the plains of Moab, which are by the Jordan opposite Jericho. And Moses and Eleazar the priest and all the leaders of the congregation went out to meet them outside the camp. And Moses was angry with the officers of the army and captains of thousands and captains of hundreds who had come from service in the war. And Moses said to them, have you spared all the women? Behold, these caused the sons of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to trespass against Jehovah in the matter of Peor. So the plague was among the congregation of the Lord. Now therefore, kill every male among the little ones. Kill every woman who has known man intimately. But all the girls who have not known man intimately, spare for yourselves. And you, camp outside the camp 7 days, whoever has killed any person, and whoever has touched any slain. Purify yourselves, you and your captives, on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. And you shall purify for yourselves every garment and every article of leather, and all the work of goat's hair, and all articles of wood. Then Eleazar the priest said to the men of war, who had gone to battle, This is the statute of the law which the Lord has commanded Moses. Only the gold and silver, the bronze and the iron and the tin and the lead, everything that can stand the fire, you shall pass through the fire, and it shall be clean. But it shall be purified with water for impurity. But whatever cannot stand the fire, you shall pass through the water. And you shall wash your clothes on the seventh day and be clean.
Okay. All right, that's good right there. All right, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so this is one of those interesting places where people read this story and, well, God made him just kill everybody. He's so mean and so bad. And you read that Old Testament God, he's just really, really bad. So where's our microphone? There it is. Okay. Are you Mr. Microphone today? Who would like any comments? Go ahead. Yeah, give it to Chris.
I have a question.
Okay.
I'm confused by the Moabites that we were just studying under Balak.
Okay.
And then I hear about Moabites and then the Midianites. So here's the children of Israel going after the Midianites. And I know they were the ones that caused them to sin. But so didn't Balak do that also with the Moabites? I'm confused with all these people.
Same people, basically. Moabites are the larger area of Moab, which starts, if you go, let me get my brain in gear. Moabites are further to the south. We're actually, I'm just changing my geography here. The Moabites are further to the south. We're actually in the area that would be the Ammonites, but in the steppes of Moab. And so basically what happens is if you look at the Dead Sea, about halfway down on the east side there's a river called the Arnon River, and that divides the land of basically the Moabites are to the south and the Ammonites are to the north. I did that backwards. The Edomites are way down past that, and then the Ammonites, and then the Moabites. There's too many ites over there. And so the Midianites are a specific group within Moab. Okay, so it's a specific group of people under this specific king, Balak, that wanted to attack them. These are actually, if you look at their heritage, I think I wrote it down here somewhere. They're cousins. They're actually cousins of Israel. I'm trying to think. They're the offspring of Abraham by Keturah in Genesis 25 and Genesis 37. So that's where they're coming from. And it's very interesting that Israel, the people, very often are at war, even to this day, with some of their relatives. You know, this is a big family feud. I mean, the Bible describes, when you look at who these people are that are, you know, in battles today over there. Most of the Muslims in Israel won't hesitate to tell you that they're descendants of Ishmael. You know, so that basically makes them Israel's cousin. You know. But it's just a problem of, are we going to be obedient and walk in the blessing that God's given us, or, you know, or just say, no, I'm in charge. And that's basically what's going on here. Yeah, so they are in the land of Moab, for clarity. They're in the land of Moab in a particular place near the north end of the Dead Sea on the eastern side, where it starts coming down, and it literally comes down in plateaus like that, and they translate it the steppes of Moab, which is, and to this day actually it's an agricultural area, but it is kind of weird the way it's like, it's just levels. It's almost like somebody made it like that, but it's natural. And it's a big agricultural area. And it over and over it tells us it's across from Jericho, and so again that tells us where they are. So it's just north of the Dead Sea to the east side. But yeah, okay. So they're in Moab dealing with Midianites. Hope that helped. Yeah, it took me long enough to sort it out in my brain. I had it backwards to start with. Go ahead.
So I shouldn't say so. God obviously felt that he had to perform some type of genocide here to stop it completely back then. And did he already know in advance, I'm sure he did, that there was these people that were never going to come back at all, like they were done with
So-
their behavior, and they were
Can I-
rebellious?
Can I play with your question for a minute?
Oh, definitely, that's...
So basically, why did he do this? I think is what we're asking. We refer to it as genocide, wipe them out. Well, it's not really genocide because he didn't wipe them all out. It's very interesting that, so historically, let's look at what historically would have happened. Typically what would happen is in a battle situation, they would they would take the women captive and the children captive and kill the men, particularly the men of war. And the boys and the children, they let them live, and the women. And so they actually did here what was fairly normal for warfare of that day and for the tribe of Israel. But all of a sudden, God says, what are you doing? Moses says, what are you doing? I didn't say do this, okay? Now, it's real important in verse 1 and 2 here, I think it is, it's like, I said, Yahweh spoke in verse 1. This is his idea. And he tells them in verse 3, Moshe spoke and said, arm yourself. And I like read verse 3 in the American Standard there.
32:3.
Yeah. 31:3.
31:3.
Yeah, we back up on page 31:3. New American Standard.
And Moshe spoke to the people, saying, arm men from among you for the war, that they may go against Midian to execute the Lord's vengeance
Stop.
on Midian.
This isn't Israel's vengeance. This is Yahweh's vengeance. Translated Lord's of Custer. Yahweh's vengeance against Midian. So this is different. This is not war. This is not territorial. This is not, like a territorial thing. This is God's vengeance. Why? So the question would be, why does he deviate from the norm of, first of all, by killing the women? Well, he tells us, these are the women who seduced Israel. This is them. They're guilty before God. These are the women. So these women, if they've basically, to be blunt, it's like if they're old enough, if they've had sex, then they're involved in this temple worship system of this pagan god. And these are the women who seduced Israel to commit idolatry. Now, idolatry biblically is one of the worst possible sins, right? Because you're worshiping, he don't care if it says, he knows it's wood and stone, but seriously, the creator of the universe goes, really? You're going to bow down before a rock or a stick that somebody's carved? When you've got the creator of the universe standing here? Mike right here. And so then the second part, he's like, and these women, basically saying these women are more guilty than the men. Because they're the ones that did it. They're the ones these men had relationships with in the pagan temple. And then go ahead. I'm going to hear what you got.
Well, I see it also as Balaam, which is their king. Balak, yeah. Just how many times went and said, okay, curse them. Okay, come over here now. Let's curse them. Come over here now. Let's curse. Just kept at it. It was this is, not just once, not just twice, not just three. And then finally said, okay, you can't curse them, but we know what we can do.
Yeah.
And so it was very devious. It wasn't just
the entire.
It was evil.
People. It was, yeah.
How it all played out up to this point.
This is another interesting thing there. Since the king was involved with it, okay, that makes this a national curse. This king, your leader, can curse an entire nation in a minute. Be careful who you elect. Your leader can curse an entire nation, okay? And that's exactly what we see here. He cursed his entire people and got them in that mindset. You see that. Leaders get their people in a mindset that becomes a demonic, evil mindset. But it goes, there's another step. Why does he kill the boys? Now, these are not men of war. And typically they would have taken them as slaves. Okay, or taken them and and converted. They would in other words, they recognize innocence. So why would he take Anybody want to try that one? Go ahead.
Were they
Yep.
already using boys as their...
I don't think so. I mean, it's possible, but I would assume that if it was anything pornographic evil, that they would have already been, because that did and does happen in that area today, just to put not too fine a point on it. And so, but I think they would have known. So this is maybe even little boys. These are maybe little kids. So why would you execute a toddler? Great question. I'm going to let y'all think about it, but go ahead with your question.
It wasn't a question, it was a comment, because you had
Okay.
mentioned how the Lord feels about idolatry, but when the Jews were in the wilderness and they made the calf, didn't Moses grind up gold and they were forced to swallow gold, and
So
then
I
the
want you
ground
to say
opened
that
up
again,
and swallowed them up?
slower.
I'm so sorry.
I don't know who trained her now.
I know why Lydia talks so fast.
Despacio y claro.
Yes, so sorry. I was just, when you had mentioned how the Lord feels about idolatry, but when the Jews were in the wilderness...
Israel was in the wilderness.
Well, when Israel was in the
All the
wilderness...
tribes were there. Yep.
And they had made the calf out of gold. Moses was so upset he smashed the stones, and then he grinded up gold, maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but then he grinded up the gold, and they were swallowing the gold, and then the ground opened up and swallowed those who were a part of that idolatry.
Well, actually, there were 3,000 people
Yeah.
killed that day.
Yeah.
And basically what happened was, and it's interesting that he's telling him here, right where he stopped reading, he was talking about that you purify yourself. And we had just got the instruction just a couple weeks ago for the ashes of the red heifer, right? And so what we saw in that idea of burning the idol and grinding it up and putting it into the water and the people drinking it, and then the tribe of Levi basically said, go and kill your brother, your neighbor, whoever, but it doesn't tell us how they knew who to kill. And they killed, I mean, there's 3 million people, they killed 3,000. How did they choose the 3,000? And then we get this instruction and we realize that, oh, this is not new. That's exactly what they just did with the golden calf, and it was like a guilt. It was a jealousy offering.
Wormwood.
And so it became poison. Their bellies swelled, we presume, because that's what it says happened. And so the Levites knew who to kill. And so so they actually killed the 3,000 people. I mean, anytime you get something like that going on, it's never everybody. You know, and so how do you figure out the guilty party? And that's basically what was going on. So in that case, they knew who the guilty party was. In this case, they knew who the guilty parties were as well, because it's an entire nation who has risen against Israel, doing anything as a nation they can to curse them. And so we know the women are guilty because they're temple prostitutes, male and female, okay? And so he's going to wipe them out. So that's how the women got involved, where they normally wouldn't be involved. But now we've gone 2 more steps in that we've got little boys and little girls. Now what's interesting, he's going to let the little girls, and these are maybe toddlers. I mean, it doesn't say what the age, but there was an age or whatever. Why the little boys? Go ahead, you try it, and then Wayne.
What I understand is the reason why the little boys are killed, because you even look at Moses. He grew up to know who he was.
There you go.
So they take revenge on...
That's good.
And it happens today still from back in the Middle East. That's why they're like,
That's
I
a good
guess they continue
idea.
doing what they do.
Go ahead, I want to hear Wayne.
Well, it's that, and that they're the seed
Little louder.
of that nation. It's that, and it's also that they are the seed of that nation, that it would come back.
Mm-hmm.
And that subsequent revenge that she's talking about, that's a world that goes back into history deep.
Deep.
That when you go to wipe out something like that, you always kill the boys so they don't come back for revenge when they grow
When they
up.
figure out who they are.
But I think this case, it was because of the seed.
And so there's that's all very true, and that historically you're totally right. Do you have a comment, Mark? Go ahead.
Yeah, just a little geography there. That area that they're probably in has got a lot of rolling hills, pine tree forest, and then it spills out into some plains with some smaller rolling hills. It's really pretty in that
It
area.
is a pretty area. It is a pretty area. go ahead.
Do we need, or are we under, and do we need cleansing from any national curses that we may have?
Duh. I don't want to go there. Go ahead.
I just have a comment.
Okay.
I find it interesting that God would punish the Israelites when they were sinning for specific things, including idolatry, multiple times. This time he's not going after them, he's going after the Moabites or the Midianites for trying to infiltrate them through another way. And because of the curse, and because they're trying to curse them.
That is interesting. That is interesting. Although we do see that there were several thousand of them killed because of that. So I forget.
Judged.
There actually were there were 20 or 30,000 of them were killed in a plague that they started. So he did punish them, but he didn't. Go ahead, Wayne.
There's a pattern. There's many patterns that every nation that the Lord used to judge Israel never worked good for them in the end. They may have taken them into captivity, and they may have ruled over them for hundreds of years, but when the time of their suffering was over and God released them, that country that did that always paid a heavy price.
You don't want to be the one that cursed Israel. And so I'm gonna propose one other suggestion with the boys, unless you had one. Did you have one? Or are you going somewhere else?
No, I'm going to stay on that, but I'm interested to see what you're going to say, because when Wayne mentioned patterns, the pattern that I see in this, and I know I got revelation on the brain because we've been having a great time on Wednesday nights with our midrash, but you know, the first thing I see is that Moshe is telling them to number 12 tribes, 1,000 from each tribe, to go to war. Well, in our study in Revelation, we're seeing where there's a numbering of 12 tribes, 12,000 from each tribe. And when we looked at the pattern, the reason was always to go to war or to get land. And he prepares them for that. And then it says that Phinehas went with them, who was the son of the high priest. Revelation, we have a high priest leading us into war. And then the going through the fire and you go through the fire to be cleaned, and then through the water for impurity. And we talked about the tribulation is our opportunity to cleanse ourselves, to go through the fire like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then it said that in Numbers 31 that they killed the kings of the earth and Balaam. And in our study in Revelation is the kings of the earth and Balaam is mentioned. So I know that when they come back and there's that cleansing, we're going to root out everything that's evil.
Yeah, and exactly. And it's interesting that the Torah portion has been paralleling very much so the book of Revelation as we look at it. So I want to offer one other thing. Who inherits the land? The sons inherit the land, because we just did the section where it talked about that if a man only has daughters, then the daughters get to inherit it. So if they let these sons live, these boys live, and they marry into Israel, they're going to end up, the enemies of Israel are going to end up inheriting the land. Okay, so these not only are these guys going to remember who they are, okay, and this is not really far from what actually happened in Israel later. When we look at the situation where, by whatever twist of how things happened, the enemies of Israel inherited the land, and now Israel's having to pry and scratch and fight for it back. Okay, because basically this ultimately happened, that their enemy inherited the land, and now they're, kind of, and with all the lies and drama. Yeah, go ahead.
When Moses did a strategic thing, he chose 1,000 from each tribe, because those 1,000 would become unclean for a 7 or 10 day period. And so if Israel was called on to defend itself, it would have men available, having only sent 1,000 per tribe to start with, while they were in a condition of uncleanness afterwards. Did I say all that right?
Yep. But what we're going to see, what's very interesting, is actually the numbers here are like the Six-Day War. I mean, Israel is so insanely outnumbered in this battle, it's ridiculous. Go ahead, Norm.
Yeah, one of the first things I noticed, because I'm following the King James, it says, "And avenge the Lord of the Midian." So it's the Lord's vengeance right here, even in this translation, okay?
Okay.
And this really should speak to us, apply to us, because he said to us, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay," right? Mm-hmm. And our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. And that's what that was talking about, as well as Amalekite.
Amen.
Also, Satan behind
If
that
we're walking where we're supposed to be walking, the battle is not ours.
Right. But also, if we obey, this is what I got out of this last, if we obey what God was telling us to do, like he was telling them to do this, right?
Right.
Then we really don't have any consequences when we truly obey what God is telling us to do. Because he's the one telling us to do it, and he's the one that's doing the battle.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Wayne and Rodney.
Wayne.
And then Rodney.
Go ahead.
It's moments like this that as I'm sure most everybody in this room does and at home, is that you start applying these issues and these teachings, and you start breaking it down. And when you get to the most common denominator of it all, which is Shema Israel, and to love one another like that, it's God's will that none be lost. He takes. I don't see where he takes pleasure in any of this, but he's Kadesh. He's holy. He's set apart, and he can't allow his, to put it in a human term, emotion, allow himself to defile himself for any of us.
Right.
And we went to Publix the other day when we were coming home from Publix. And we were talking about being transformed in a twinkling of an eye into whatever it is that we're supposed to be, or should have been in the beginning. And I told Marianne, I said, God showed that to me in a vision once, in a dream vision that I had years and years ago. And it's true that when he comes back, that transformation in a twinkling of an eye. And in the vision that I had, as you looked at him in the sky, and you focused on him as you're going to him, there's a shalom that you've never experienced before. But if you took your eye off him and looked down, the people that were not living in God, what was happening to them was horrific.
Yeah.
And it was horrible. But as soon as you took your eye off them and put it back on God, there was peace again. So I guess what I'm saying is that not only was this a physical thing for the revenge and the cleansing of the house of Israel, physically and spiritually, for what had happened, because they were physically cleaned when they were punished, then spiritually the enemy that did this or participated in this was cleansed. But God also gave them God could have done that himself.
Oh, yeah.
He could have sent a tidal wave, a forest fire, a hurricane, whatever. He could have wiped it out.
I mean, he did it. He did it over and over with Israel with a plague. Just going right through and taking out the guilty parties.
But he makes us. He doesn't make us. He doesn't make us do anything. That's the wrong word. He invites us to walk in his ways, and he shows us patterns, and he gives us holy days, and he gives us commandments and things to walk in, and causes our hearts to help me somebody. That thing that we
He shows us.
We learn the patterns, and we get the understanding. We have understanding of why things are and how, the bread of life. He's the showbread. He's his blood. He's God to become flesh, and all these patterns and stuff. But it's also that very end, that last thing, when he comes back, when he's not the king suffering Joseph. He's not Joseph ben David, but when he comes back as Joseph David, when he comes back King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and the hem of his garment is dipped in blood, it's not going to be, it's depending, I guess it depends on where your eyes are.
Yeah, where are we looking at?
And,
you've got that here. You've got that here, depending on where you're looking, you know.
That's what I'm trying to.
Exactly, that's the pattern.
I'm not using the right words, but I'm trying.
Let me expound on it, because I'm right there. So basically what's happened, we got 12,000 people, right? 12,000 men of war, okay? So if we move over to verse 35, they brought back captive 30, this is just captives, 32,000 women who haven't known a man. So you're talking about the proportions? They brought back 32,000 virgins, young girls, okay, who hadn't been a part of this situation. So they didn't kill all the women. If they hadn't been a part of that temple prostitute thing, they brought them back and they will become part of Israel. 32,000 of them, and those are just the young girls. So how many men were there that they slaughtered? I mean, how many men of war? I mean, what, 4 times that many? 90,000, 100,000 against 12,000, and it gets better. Let's keep going. I'm not going to go into all the numbers. I mean, just massive amounts of sheep and cattle, 675,000 sheep. I said I wasn't going to do that. Going down to verse 48. Then the officers who were over the captains and the thousands and the hundreds come to Moshe, and they said, "Your servants have taken account of your men of war who were under our command, and not a man is missing." They went, amen. Hallelujah. I mean, what can you say to that?
I just want to add to what you're saying and
Go
what
ahead.
Wayne was saying. Through all that, there was so much grace. And I was thinking about all the people that raise their Bible and they're all New Testament, and they don't follow the God of the Old Testament and how he's so mean. They don't see the grace that was given to the Israelites, to the Hebrews throughout the whole time.
Oh, yeah.
There was so much grace. And that is a testimony to Yeshua for sure.
We're going to see it right here. Verse 48 is grace. I mean, because they had to go up against probably, this looks like just 250,000 people here, just rough numbers, given that there were this many young girls. And they noticed, they said, not a man is missing. Verse 50, therefore. They're like, I mean, how humbling is this when you realize that you have just massive battle in the midst of war, you don't see what's going on, and then it's all over, and you count everybody and go, oh my goodness, we weren't doing this. You ever notice they don't even realize in the midst of the battle that they're not the ones fighting the battle. It's after it's over they go, how is this even possible? And so they recognize that, and they said, therefore we have brought an offering to Yahweh. Every man brought our ornaments, our gold, everything we found to make. I'm struggling with translations here. To make atonement is a good word. It's a covering. In other words, to make a covering for ourselves. They recognized that they're guilty, that it's nothing but the grace of God that they've all come back. It's blatantly the grace of God that they've come through this battle victoriously and not lost a man, and they're so humbled by it. It's like, hey, we don't want anything. We're giving it all back. All the stuff we took, the bracelets and stuff, here, we're giving all the gold back. They're basically falling on their face. We talk about the fear of the Lord. That's what it means right there. It's this awesome reverence, recognition of, oh wow, and you just fall on your face. It's like, that is how powerful he is and how present he is and how real he is. Remember, He said, this is the vengeance of Yahweh. He's doing this. This is his battle. Okay? And so when we do that, they were, sometimes we think we're fighting the battle. God sent me into this battle. Well, then it's no problem, mine. It's like he's fighting the battle. And so that is really cool, and it's that they recognized it. Any other questions about that? Go ahead, Rodney.
Well, I had a thought that connected 2 Kings 19:35 to it about the angel of the Lord went out and killed 185,000.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to connect those dots, if you could do that.
Well, sometimes, like I said before, a lot of times he does it himself. I mean, he just blatantly does it himself. I mean, especially when he fights Israel and he unleashes the plague within Israel, and people just start falling dead. One of the plagues, the interesting plague is Nahab and Abihu, and when the earth opened up, that she mentioned earlier, that plague that happened there, they don't even know. That plague was just like instantaneous death. People were just falling dead, and they just say it was just a plague of death. People, just 32,000 people or whatever, just before they could get it stopped. And once again, what happened, Aaron, the priest, goes out and made atonement for them, just, interceded. And remember, the high priest is a picture of who? Who's the high priest a picture of? Yeshua. The whole book of Hebrews is about priesthood. We think it's about covenant because it's the way it's translated. And if you haven't heard me say this, you're going to hear it now, because I'm going to say it over and over until people get it. When you're reading the book of Hebrews, ignore the italicized letters and it'll make sense. They were trying to make it say what they understood it to mean. It's not a mistranslation. They just what they understood, which ultimately is a mistranslation. But anyway, just read what it actually says, and it's basically, it's about the priesthood, and that the earthly priesthood is a picture of Yeshua, and the ultimate higher priesthood, the Melchizedek priesthood, which is eternal, ever present. It's before and after. Hands everywhere. Wayne, and then right here in front.
Well, the essence of 49. Verse 49, like you said, the fear of the Lord, the understanding of that all those men went out and all of them came back without one loss, and how they praise God for that. The flip side of that is all the other nations that heard of this or saw this happening, that Israel could go out to war and come back with every single man.
Amen.
Their God is real, and it created a very, that fear of the Lord also became reality for a lot of nations. That you don't want to go messing with Israel because they're God.
That's testimony. Amen. And I was just thinking, what's the difference right over here? Right in the front. Right here, front row. What's the difference between when a believer... Go ahead. Didn't you have your hand up? Oh, you didn't? I'm sorry. It was just a praise report, like hallelujah. Okay, I'm sorry. Let me just finish with this thought. I did that. I got to share this with you. I did that. John, and we were singing a song. It was like we were doing a song up here. I don't remember. It was like trumpets or something one night. Anyway, we were doing a song that night. And I kind of got into the song. It was the first time we'd done it. It was the, I can't even think, Sinak sings it. Anyway. So we're doing the song. It was the first time we'd done it. And I kind of got into the song. It was like about, he's our victory, he's our da-da-da-da-da. And I'm singing that. And I just kind of got into it. Like, I'm holding my hand up, pointing at him. When you're singing a song and you hold the leader's hands as singer, that means go to verse 1. And they started, we're at the end of the song, and they started singing it again. I'm like, where are we? What are we doing? I'm supposed to be lead. I don't know where they are. And they're like, I realized, I was like, and Trista's asking, was like, why did you start over? You didn't tell us you were going to do that. It was like the song goes on for like 12, 14 minutes, It was like, what were y'all doing? Like, what were you doing? You kept saying, go back to 1. You're like, oh, okay. Anyway, so I'm thinking about believers, though, talking about battles. We're in battles. And I got to share this because yesterday a friend right out here, I was talking to him, I'm not going to put anybody on the spot, told a miraculous story about healing. Okay? Right out here. We were working out here and told us a miraculous story about a personal healing. Young man standing with me, I had just asked the question, do you have any spiritual beliefs? I just met him. He just started working with me yesterday. And I said, do you have any spiritual beliefs? No, not really. Kind of 30, 28 years old, whatever, and just grew up in one of those houses, just moved here from California, and don't really have any beliefs. And then he hears this story about a miraculous healing from cancer. Okay? And I get back in the car and I said, I get to hear those stories all the time. It's exactly what you're saying. We're in these battles today that only He, I won't point because somebody will go back to verse 1, only He can win. But today, those same battles, we look at them and we go, praise Yahweh, we know who did it. But it becomes a witness to the world who don't yet know Him. And so, my brother back there don't even know that happened. So I'm sharing that. But yeah, it happens today. It happens today. Think about that. So it's not just a witness to us, and when we tell the story, it's a witness to the world that don't yet know Him. Amen? So awesome. Yes, Rodney, go ahead.
Well, again, back to what I read that chapter just because I had seen it somewhere. It was the humility of Hezekiah with Isaiah and their prayer as a nation that he sent the angel out to destroy the foreign army. Mm-hmm. And that was what it was, the humility at the base of it also here.
Yeah. And, I would guess it looks like, and what's interesting about this one here, it doesn't necessarily look like they were humbled when they came back from the battle extremely victorious until they realized that nobody had died. And then they go, oh my goodness. Because they're probably patting themselves on the back a little bit. I'm thinking this time, look what we did. Look how many people we captured. Look how much booty we got. We got all this gold. We got all the animals. We got everything. And then they go, nobody died. Dude, you didn't do this. So, obviously when God just does it, the angel of the Lord, the hand of God, we know who it is. But this is an interesting picture of Him working through people. And I don't think they even knew it until they did the count. It's interesting, He had them count to begin with, and then they counted again just to see how bad did we get beat up. You didn't even fight this battle. And that's what happens a lot of times when it's real Yahweh's battle. We're not fighting it. We think we're fighting it. We're doing our part, and we do have to do our part. We have to show up. Every single time. And let me just say this since we're there. A lot of times I see people saying, well, I'm just waiting on the Lord. I'm just waiting to see what He's going to do. Well, I got a news flash for you. He's sitting there just like you are, waiting to see what you're going to do. The Word says that God guides the steps of the righteous. That means you're not sitting in a chair with your arms folded. You're out there doing something. You're walking. You're on a trip. You're doing your part. He can't guide your steps if you're not taking a step, right? And so it's a picture of we are taking steps. We are participating. We are doing our part. And that's why I keep praying this prayer. What He's doing to us right here, what you're talking about, the humbleness in our heart, what He's doing to us so that He can work through us. Because He's going to do it. But He has to prepare a vessel. He has to prepare a place to operate. Go ahead. Who's ever next? I don't know. Go ahead. Yeah.
So just a question or a thought that I've had. You mentioned that you thought they were surprised when they counted, that they realized they hadn't lost anyone. Mm-hmm. Do you see a hint of resurrection in there at all?
There's a lot of funny stories about the resurrection where there's quietness as people look around. It's like everybody's quiet and looking around and seeing who's resurrected, and you're going like, wow, I didn't know those people were going to be here. They're so quiet. And somebody goes, they're really quiet because they're surprised to see you here. I don't know, it's going to be just, I do think that's going to be a very interesting time, but honestly, ultimately, we're not going to be looking at each other. We're going to be looking at Him, and we're going to be overwhelmed by His glory. We're going to be just like these people. We are going to be very humbled at the power and presence of God. When we stand in the power and presence of God at the resurrection, that's just so off the chain. I don't think we can even begin to imagine it.
I'm just messing with you.
It's just the conversation just floods my mind with so many thoughts. As PJ was just saying that, when our brother Judah, the veils were lifted off his eyes, imagine how he's going to go.
Wow.
Imagine all the world when in that moment we've been transformed in that twinkling of an eye, and he's here and there is nothing between us. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just,
we can't even comprehend.
It's overwhelming, yeah.
The glory and the totality of finally being without blemish and in the presence of our Creator in that wedding.
Mm-hmm. And I think, yeah, these people would have just seen a glimpse of his righteousness there. Go ahead, Richard.
When the Israelites realized that not a man had been killed, they were coming out of battle, and their battle wasn't long range, it was up close and personal, hand to hand. And so in that battle, they were unaware if or how many casualties would have been going on.
Yeah,
so they were totally surprised when they found out, and the report came out that they had no casualties. And so they really, it's not that they were careless, they were just from the perspective they had in the battle.
You just assumed that you've lost a bunch of men, and and you're right. This is swords and clubs. I mean, this is definitely face to face, up close and personal. Yep.
And twice as many people, or 3 times, 4 times.
Oh yeah, and they're just outnumbered like crazy. Go ahead, Norm.
I want to say from my own experience, for many years, 43 years in serving Christ, I'm finding today our greatest battle is to get on our knees. That's our greatest warfare, that we can come in agreement with the Lord, and it's unbelievable how much He speaks to us in that arena. When we're going through, which I'm going through right now, I won't get into that, what I would refer to as the fellowship of His sufferings. Yes, you think about, and he was speaking this to me, you think about how Jesus poured out His whole life in love to the disciples. And liken unto, if we pour out our whole life to our children, and for whatever reason, they go the other way. But it's like the Lord was ministering to me that's what happened to Him. That's exactly what happened to Him. All forsook Him. And one of the greatest challenges also, we've been through one battle, and then we might say in our spirit, and you want me to go to this next one now?
Yep.
Well,
we brought you through the last one. You're gonna have to go.
We should be thankful that we went through the battles to prepare us for that battle that's yet to come.
Some of those battles scare me. Like I make it through a battle, it's like, seriously, this is just preparation. I'm not excited about the next one. Like this, it's like, oh my goodness, if this was preparation. But ultimately, you know, the mistake we make, and the prayer part is very interesting, because our prayer has to be in the right way. Our prayer has to be from a position of humbleness and servitude, and not, I think a lot of people have been taught that prayer is when you're making your wish list for the candy store. And that's not what it is. It's allowing Him to work on us, work on our heart, circumcise our heart. I mean, that's very Torah. So that He has a place, a vessel to work with. And we see that actually, if we can keep going here a little bit, we actually see that here in verse, I was just looking, like just pointing out, in 32:11, He's reminding them of what happened when they went in Kadesh Barnea the first time, how the people were disheartened by that they didn't come back. You know, they didn't come back with a good report. And except for, and it says, this is actually about heart right here. Surely none of the men who came from Egypt from 20 years old and above shall see the land which I swore to Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, because they have not wholly followed me. So this is about humbling themselves and about totally following him, which is what you're talking about. So, and it said, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, okay, and who was the leader of the tribe of Judah, and he's not even a full-blooded, he's not a Jew, actually. He's their champion. He's a Kenizzite. And Joshua the son of Nun, for they have wholly followed Yahweh. They have totally followed him. And so I'm sure their prayer and their faith is obviously different than the rest of the people, because the rest of the people are operating in fear. If you're operating in fear, your prayer sounds like a scared man. Okay? And Caleb and Yahushua is saying, we can do this. Because they're seeing the God over here that wins the battle. It's like, we can do this. God, Yahweh's with us. We can do this. We can take these people. Yeah, but they're really big. I know they're going to hit the ground really hard, so make sure you're not under them when they fall. No problem, man. Okay? I think they were Bahamian. I worked in the Bahamas. No problem, man. It's like, no matter what the problem was, it's no problem. But it's still there. Yeah, no, but it's no problem. Okay. Maybe that's just faith. Maybe these guys just have just total faith. There's literally a church on every street corner. Maybe it's just a lot of faith. They just don't do anything. I don't know. But I think that's really what we see, that our prayer, and it's almost a challenge to you to look at your prayer life. Look at your prayers, and what do they sound like? Are they prayers of fear? Because if they are prayers of fear, help me with this, help me this, help me this, help me this. But everything God's done in your life is like blessing, 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 blessing. Why are you not trusting him? Why are you operating in fear? What has he got to do? Right over here is a question. Behind you.
I got it.
Oh, there
real
you are.
quick.
Oh, didn't see it. I need to paint that thing like fluorescent pink or something so I can see where it's at.
So thinking about what Richard said and what Mark mentioned, so there's 1,000 from each tribe, and they don't lose one man. So the 144,000, 12,000 from each tribe, how many men you think they're going to lose?
None.
I don't see them losing any either. And, so that takes you back to Revelation, and it talks about that, they have their father's name written in their forehead. They sing a new song, and but they're redeemed from the earth and possibly resurrected. And but it was interesting to me that I'm not going to lose any of them either. So that is a wonderful pattern.
Okay. Right behind you.
I was reading a little bit ahead, and what you were saying, I know, but it goes along with what you were saying.
Okay.
It says, and look, in verse 14, in chapter 32, and look, you have risen in your father's place a brood of sinful men to increase still more the fierce anger of the Lord against Israel. For if you turn away from following him, which is exactly what you're just saying, in our prayer life even, if we turn away from following him, he will once again leave them in the wilderness. I don't know about you guys, but when I am not at peace with God, I feel like I'm in the wilderness.
Yep.
And you will destroy all these people.
Yep. Yep. And of course, the story here, it actually outlines the story here of the tribes desiring to stay on the east side. Reuben, Gad,
Half the tribe of Manasseh.
and Manasseh, and they stay on the east side of the Jordan. But they explain to Moshe that no, we'll go over and we'll fight and we'll do all that. We're not trying to skip out on you. He was first thought they were trying to skip out on, but it's interesting that they basically took a huge chunk of what would be Jordan today. Reuben and Gad took a big chunk of Jordan. They took a piece of Jordan that's bigger than Israel is today. And then, who else was? Oh, Manasseh. Manasseh was to the north, and the area that Manasseh took is basically Syria. They basically took all of Syria. And when in this portion, it ultimately lines out the boundaries in chapter 34. And when it lays out these boundaries, they are about 4 times the size of Israel today if you include all of the so-called West Bank territories. In other words, all of physical Israel today. It's a huge place, and this is what it's supposed to be. And we're not even talking about the Ezekiel, second coming size of it. We're talking about just physical Israel, how big it's supposed to be. So let's just move forward so we can get a little bit of this in there, because we're supposed to make it all the way to the end of the book today. We obviously could have stayed on the first chapter the whole time, but that's cool. That just shows you how much is there, and the whole idea here is to get you interested, and just pique your interest. Let's see. So they have this understanding about what they're going to do, and then in chapter 33 is the second part of the double portion, Christy, you want to read? I'm going to give Richard a break. You want to come? Okay. I do. Mm-hmm.
You want to keep this?
I got one. She can read it. I think she got pretty good eyes. She can read this one.
I like King James, and he doesn't.
See, I thought we'd get along about everything. We don't even get along about the Bible.
No, we do.
We do. But what version?
I just kind of grew up reading the King James.
We all did. We got over
and
it.
I liked it.
So what's interesting...
Where are we?
I'm not sure yet. I'm working on it. What's interesting in chapter 33, it really reads in Hebrew, these are the going out. And so it actually, notice, and I might just scan this, and let me just scan this chapter.
Okay.
The stages, the stations, the stages are stations as they go out. Now we know there's actually 40 places listed here that they go out from. We know that it's not literally every place they stop, because the Torah mentions other places, but these are the places where they spent a reasonable amount of time, to where that when they left this place, I mean, there's one place I was looking at, and like they camped here and then they camped here, and you go, well, those places are 2 miles apart. I mean, you move 2.5 million people, 2 miles is not a big deal. And so it's really not even mentioned here. But when they actually leave a territory, now what's interesting, this is sort of where the idea of the wandering Jews come from. Because it doesn't say anything about where they stay. It just says where they leave from. Like, well, they left here, and then they left there, and they left 40 places here.
I thought it was a plant. I thought it was a plant.
It is a plant.
Okay.
They're a plant. Okay, so it tells you the places they departed from, and there's so like I say, there's 40 of them, and obviously that's a biblical number there. I do want to share something here in 33. Verse 2, verse 2, I'll just point this out. Moshe wrote down the starting points of their journeys at the command of Yahweh. So God told him to do this. So you write this down, where you started from. Think about it. He's looking at Israel and looking at where they started from. Okay, I shared with somebody yesterday that I'm not here because of who I am. I'm here because of where I came from. Does that make sense? What did he bring you out of? Where has he brought you from? And look at this. What does he do with Israel? He brings them from a place, and they get another place. Like, oh, this is where we are. No, I'm bringing you from there, and I'm bringing you from there, and I'm bringing you from there. Every time we think we're there, he brings us somewhere else. He brings us to a new level and a new place. And so I think there's a very interesting picture of sanctification there. This is a process of cleansing Israel, cleansing Egypt out of Israel is really what this process is about. But it does say in verse 3 that they departed from Ramses on the first month, the 15th day of the first month, on the day after the Passover. The children went out with boldness in the sight of all. There's like all this. You have to look at all the verses about Passover to understand when they left. And so it's obviously a daytime exodus, not a nighttime exodus.
Yeah,
Okay?
15th.
And so, and it's on the 15th day, we see that they went out, on the day after. So it's not clear in other places, but that's just one of the places you can see it. And then in verse 39 there we have Aaron passing at 123 years old on Mount Hor. Yeah.
That's an old man.
Well, I don't know, not really. I was actually thinking yesterday, man, it's like at like 60 or something, you're just starting to get going. It's like, okay, now I'm ready to, got some stuff lined up, ready to do some stuff, It's like at 120, it's like, I don't know, interesting. So we go through all these places they leave, they camp, and they end up in the plains of Moab in verse 49, where they are now. Now we get in something I call the commission. That, you've heard of the Great Commission, Matthew 28, right? We have the Great Commission we talk about all the time. Here's the Great Commission for Israel. I'm going to let you start at verse 50 and go to the end of the chapter.
Okay. Then the Lord spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan opposite Jericho, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel, and say to them, when you cross over the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you, and destroy all their figure stones, and destroy all their molten images, and demolish all their high places. And you shall take possession of the land and live in it, for I have given the land to you to possess it. And you shall inherit the land by lot, according to your families. To the larger you shall give more inheritance, and to the smaller you shall give less inheritance. Wherever the lot falls to anyone, that shall be his. You shall inherit according to the tribes of your fathers. But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then it shall come about that those whom you let remain of them will become as pricks in your eyes and as thorns in your sides, and they shall trouble you in the land in which you live. And it shall come about that as I plan to do to them, so I will do to you."
1948, just a thought. 1948, right after Israel declared their independence, they were attacked by all these Arab nations, and the Arab nations told them, like, get out of Israel. Run, get out of there. We're going to destroy these people. What did Israel say? No, don't go. Stay here. If you stay, you're going to be our friends. You can live with us. You can stay. And they did stay. 1967, Israel went up on the Temple Mount, and when they got there, the whole Jordanian Arab army had fled. There was nobody even there to fight. They had run. What did they say? 2 days later. No, come back. Y'all can have it back. You can stay there. That's exactly what's going on in Israel today. And the problem was, Israel did that because they felt like they didn't have enough people to hold the land, that they needed those people. And those people today are the thorns in their side, the pricks in their eyes. They're the people who harass them. My Bible translated, they will harass you. Those are the people who I've seen throwing rocks at windshields, at people. Those are the people who take the front end loader off a job site and slam it into, one guy was going to slam it into a bus, and as he tries to, and it's a little front end loader, it's like, come on, you can't turn over a bus. And but just as he started to hit the bus with it, a police car drove up. And so he decides to try to turn the police car over, and he finally got it on its side. That was about as far as it got, because the windows in it suddenly just started exploding, and it stopped moving as people at the intersection eliminated the subject. But the problem is, he says, if you don't cleanse this junk out of your land, and so think about it. This has still got to happen. The land is contaminated. Okay, the the people there cannot be there when the true glory of Yahweh is there. And so there can't be a golden dome on the Temple Mount. I mean, people are saying, a friend of mine up north sent me an email or text the other day, and it's like, it's just really bad. This is just it. This is the end of the world. I said, oh no, these are the good times, dude. It's like, it hadn't even got bad yet. It was like, no, you party and enjoy this, because there's a lot of stuff got to happen, Go ahead, Chris.
The pricks in your eyes and the thorns in your side reminds me of Paul.
I thought about that too. I just went to 2 Corinthians.
Yes, 2 Corinthians 12, I was like, I wonder if there were people in the church that should have been driven out that were not, and they were the thorns. I don't know. I'm wondering.
It's interesting because I just
related.
went there to read it, and it's 2 Corinthians 12:7. And it's interesting because what he says is the thorn in his side was put there to basically to keep him humble. And I'm like, I don't know if I could relate it to that. It just didn't seem to fit.
Historically, most people have taken that as some sort of physical impediment, something that was a pain or difficulty or something.
It just says, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelation for this season, so what he was being revealed of what's going on, to keep me from exalting myself, there was given me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to buffet me. So
it could be.
I can't see it being.
Well, yes and no. I mean, it could be either one. But and it's interesting. It's interesting that he doesn't say what it is.
Yeah,
that's almost more interesting than what it is. He didn't say what it is, and I think that's interesting because we have those. We have those thorns. We have those challenges. We have those people, and what's interesting is time will come where who's going to ultimately cleanse us and cleanse the land? It's going to be God that does it. It's going to be Yahweh that does it.
Richard,
go
ahead.
Comparing what Paul was facing that for the sake of humility. What we're talking about in today's Torah portion was judgment, ultimate judgment against the people who had defiled the land, turned against the Father, turned against his people, and had chosen perverted lifestyles. And so it's two different categories of harassment.
It is and it isn't. Because he goes on to describe the congregation that he's working with, and he describes this long list of pagan idolatry, filthiness, and ends the phrase with, and such were some of you. And such were some of us.
The Corinth weren't,
yeah,
weren't the greatest. All he's doing is chewing
so the reality is that basically everybody is like that. The question is, do we fully step out of it? Do we fully embrace what God is doing? Do we fully embrace what Yahweh, Yeshua is doing in our lives and in our hearts? Or do we try to stand in two places at once? And there's where we get in trouble. And when these people become a pain, when they become a problem, is when they partially embrace this but keep one foot over there. And as a leader, that's one of the most difficult things, because you try to encourage them, and they keep one foot in the old world. Because there's so many people that think you can walk on both sides of this fence. And sooner or later, it's going to be God that says, get off the fence, one side or the other, pick a side, and he'll do it. Yeah. Okay. So I want to end by 4:30, okay? I only have 2 chapters to do. Can I do it? Can you do it? Can we do it? Let's try it.
Me to read?
And so he goes on to describe, man, I wish I've got it on I have a picture of this, and it's on my email. I can't even give it to you, but it's too hard. But basically, I'll describe it for you. Chapter 34, PJ's words. Just close your eyes and get this beautiful picture. Basically what happens right now, Interestingly, the Gaza Strip is left out of this, just like it's been left out today. Gaza Strip is not part of this, which is part of why Israel wasn't totally against giving it up. But if you went to the southern edge of Israel today, where it borders with Egypt, it's kind of at the bottom of the Negev in the middle of the desert. And between the bottom of the Negev, which if you just look on a aerial map, you can see it. Israel is kind of green, and then it just turns brown. That's where the border is, right there where that green is. This border goes all the way down to the Nile River. So it goes another 40, 50 miles on down into Egypt, and it encompasses the Nile River, and it comes up to like the bottom of the Dead Sea. So it's longer to start with. It goes to the north all the way up into Syria, up around Damascus, pretty substantially up that way, all the way over to the ocean, all the where the tribe of Dan ultimately traveled and built the city of Dan, which is the northern border today, contested border. It goes beyond that border quite a bit, another 10 or 15 miles. And in other words, it encompasses a very contested area. And as I see this is the real Israel, which is interesting because other people read this book too. And I mean, the enemy reads this book and that, hey, Israel thinks this is their land. I'm like, yeah, well, Yahweh said it's their land. And so they fight tenaciously for these border areas because ultimately God has described that these lands belong to Israel. And like I said, it goes over radically into Syria and virtually encompasses all of Syria and comes down all the way down through Jordan in a big way, almost all the way over to Amman, Jordan. It might even encompass Amman, like the capital city. I think it does. But down through there. And so it ends up being about physically almost 4 times the size of modern Israel. And that's significant because this was just Israel. This wasn't somebody else. This was just Israel was able to hold this territory with God's hand. And this is the real one, and like I say, he's even going to restore, Ezekiel describes a much bigger land than this, a much greater land. Once again, the reason Israel lost the land had nothing to do with their enemies. It had to do with them. It's every time they did the same thing again and again and again. They would turn to these pagan worship systems and idolatry, and God's like, you just stepped out from under your covering. You've just stepped out. God doesn't move. We got to get that. It's like, he's standing here. He is the covering, and we decide. He's told us where he's standing. He's given us his instructions. This is where the blessings are. Deuteronomy 28. They're right here. Right here. Just stay right there. And we go, well, I want to check it out over here. No, there's lightning bolts over there. You don't want to be over there. And it's not that he moved, it's we move. Okay? And that's what Israel has done historically. They just keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. And so hopefully we will learn ultimately. Then it goes into talking about the cities. Oh. Can I do it? I mean, just point at it?
Do it.
Okay.
You got a pointer?
I do got a pointer.
Somewhere.
I do. It's right here. It's what mice do it at a football game? Mice. You know what they do at a football game? They have a rat cheer. This rat cheer. Okay. Just saying. Say, all right, let's see if I can do this. Not with these glasses, I can't do this. Okay, it's like y'all have to put up with me. All right. So, okay. Well, let's go. There's Jerusalem. So let's drop down here. Can you? There's the Gaza Strip. There's the border of modern Israel. It goes down to Eilat on the Gulf of Aqaba, a place that I like a lot. Does this scroll up at all, or is the bottom of it? Yeah. Okay. The other way. Scroll out. Yeah. Okay. And so basically, we're looking at a border that, can you go that way a little bit? And there we go. Goes from like right here. Goes from like right in here. Down. That's at the Gulf of Aqaba. So it would go basically about Highway 55 there. Highway 55, like right into there. It hits Eilat. Goes along here about, like all the way over here. So this is the Dead Sea. This is the land of Edom, just to give you an idea historically, land of Edom, land of Ammon, and the land of Moab. Where they are today is right here, called the Steppes of Moab, right in there, across from Jericho, which would be right there. Jericho is basically straight east of Jerusalem. Okay, so they're right in there. It's where they are. See that green area? That's it. That's literally the Steppes of Moab. Okay, and so the land they were given then goes like all the way out to here. It does encompass Ammon because it's big. It's about almost twice the size. It comes like way over here, goes way up here, sucks up a whole bunch of Syria and part of Lebanon, and comes to this river right here, I think. No, Tyre and Sidon's part of it. It comes right close to Beirut. I don't know if it gets Beirut, but why not? We might as well. Let's take Beirut and Damascus. The Bible describes Damascus ultimately as a smoking hole. I mean, it's just, there's nothing left. So its days are numbered too. So interesting place. Is that what I was even going to show y'all? Yeah, I think it was. Is that what I was supposed to be doing? I think so. Yeah, I was thinking something else, and then the map came up, and then, okay, so we did that, and we did that, da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
You want to go through 2 chapters.
I did. And so right there in the green place we were looking at, the Steppes of Moab, is where chapter 35 starts. It says, Yahweh spoke to Moshe in the plains of Moab across from Jericho. That's that green area, beautiful area. That's why the tribes that wanted to stay over there with the animals are like, man, that's a beautiful place. Even today. It's nothing like it was, but you can see it even shows up on the map. And then they have the cities of refuge. And the city of refuge, as it describes them, end up on both sides of the Jordan, almost equally. And so that was a kind of a permanent place that God designed, that somebody who had accidentally killed somebody would have a place to flee to be safe. And these are cities were basically run by the Levites. And he gave the Levites cities within the people, within the tribes. He gave them cities. And people say, well, why do they do that? I thought they lived at the temple. No, they don't. They're only there part of the time. They take turns. They were only there for so many months, and then they would go back to their family. And so their cities ultimately were around. But while they were there around the temple, they had an area that was theirs that they could farm and take care of, and then the next guy would come in and take it over. They didn't own it. So whatever they were farming, and the next guy came in, he could kind of take it over, and they had gardens, and they had some animals that were theirs. And so they got to do some stuff on their time off. But ultimately, when it was not their time to be serving, they could be back in their home area. And that was among the people, which was really good. And it ultimately became one of the pictures of the idea of synagogues. And once the temple, after Yeshua came and the veil was rent and the miracles didn't happen anymore in the temple, people paid less and less attention to it. And over time, historically, Jerusalem was under more and more persecution. And so the Levites that were out among the people became more and more important and more of a focus. And even in my Jewish Bible I was reading, it was saying, it pointed out that the book of Acts, the Jewish Bible actually refers to the book of Acts as a picture of what was happening, how the synagogue had become almost the focus since the people were scattered, and really that the temple was losing its luster before it was destroyed, because they knew that priests who were there weren't the right priests. They knew something had happened and the glory of God wasn't there, which it actually hadn't been there for quite a while, but the miracles had stopped and all. So the focus to synagogue is very interesting focus. Between the Old Testament, you don't see it at all. New Testament, they're everywhere. So the shift happened right there, and it really kind of started with the picture of the Levites being among the tribes and being able to, you could go ask one of them, hey, what are you supposed to do here? And they would tell you. They were basically the Levites within the land. And so you understand the idea of an accidental killing, and they would go there. Very interesting, too, that one of the traditions became that the Sanhedrin would when it commanded them to do this to the point where the Sanhedrin would make sure, it says make the paths wide. They actually took this very serious, that when a person wanted to run to one of these cities, that nothing could stop him. In other words, he should be able to make it there. And of course, they weren't going to take him in. If they found he's actually a murderer or something, they're going to deal with him themselves. They're going to stone him. So you had to be free. But they ultimately ruled that they needed a 48-foot wide, I calculated this in cubits, but basically a minimum of a 48-foot path into these cities. So if he met some guy coming down the road with a group of sheep or something, this guy could get past them. Because if somebody's chasing him, he don't want to run into a group of sheep on a little tiny road and he can't get by. And so the Sanhedrin every year met specifically to make sure that everybody could get to these cities, and that there was a fork in the road that was marked. What?
Sanctuary cities.
Sanctuary city. What am I calling them?
I know.
Oh, okay. Cities of refuge. Yeah. Or sanctuary cities. Same thing. And the actual signs would say refuge, refuge, go that way. So there was, and so it was like it was. They realized it was very important because, and it gets into this as well, because of spilling innocent blood. If innocent blood defiles the land. And so if somebody, out of anger, you kill a guy's brother and he comes at you, even though I've been mean to, man, you killed my brother. You see this going on. And you kill him, now you've spilled innocent blood. So not only have you got, an improper sentence or whatever, but you've defiled the land by spilling innocent blood. That's why it's so important. So it's really important from a spiritual standpoint, because life is in the blood. And so if you spill innocent blood, then that's really bad. What else? Inheritance, it talks about the inheritance and that if people marry, this is another, really about if people marry outside an Israelite, if a woman marries a non-Israelite, and that in the Jubilee year, basically that goes back to the original tribe, okay? And it already talked about that the men who didn't have sons, that they would, there's an interesting one right here toward the end. It's in 36:6. This is what Yahweh commands concerning the daughters of Zelophehad, saying, let them marry whoever they... So this was interesting. Remember, the daughters were going to inherit the property. Well, what about who they marry? It still doesn't work, because if they marry somebody else, it's in a different tribe, it's going to go to that tribe, right? And so they had to clarify that and said, no, it doesn't. That, in fact, to prevent that from happening, they weren't allowed to marry another tribe. They had to marry within their father's tribe. So verse 6. So they had to marry their cousins. So the inheritance of the children of Israel shall not change the hands from tribe to tribe. Every one of the children of Israel shall keep his inheritance in his tribe. And so they basically married their cousins so that it didn't change tribe. And it was just that one, occasionally a man would not have any sons, and that's just what happened then. Otherwise, the sons would marry pretty much whom they wanted to. Chapter 10 starts another... And then it goes on just to describe that situation.
Peter.
Go ahead.
In that particular context, if a man had a daughter without sons, instead of having to marry a cousin or something like that, anybody that came into grafted in or would have had that tribe
could have joined that tribe.
Could have joined that tribe.
Correct.
That could have made the difference in that they'd have, without.
Yes, they could have been engrafted into that tribe. It could have been somebody from a non-Israelite could have been grafted. Caleb, and there were a bunch of those. Because a mixed multitude came out. So they weren't forced to marry cousins. Although marrying cousins was not a big deal, because the bloodlines weren't as contaminated as they are today. And it finishes with the verse 13. These are the commandments and the judgments which Yahweh commanded the children of Israel by the hand of Moshe in the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. And so with that, we finish that Torah, that book, and say the words Chazak, Chazak, Venish Chazek, which means be strong, and may we be strengthened by the word of Yahweh.